So we just watched a video of Steve Jobs explaining the importance of team and teamwork. And there was a couple of things that really jumped out at me during the course of his conversation. And the first thing he said was, we have 0 committees at Apple. So just think about that for a second, 0 committees. And why does that matter? Well, it's kind of the oldest joke in the corporate joke book, right? Let's form a committee. We have no idea what to do or how we solve something. Let's form a committee. Well, let's form a committee to figure out the type of committee we need to solve this particular problem, right? It just goes on and on and on. And then he also went on to say, as he described this environment that teams operate in, that we have wonderful arguments, right? We have these wonderful arguments, and that really creates an environment to where the best idea wins, because that was really important to him. Now, remember when we talked about teams, kind of the definition of teamwork? Keep Steve's comments in mind, but from a business perspective, we said, a team is a group of people with a set of complementary skills in order to complete a task. Now that word complementary, that can be a little tricky. So we're not talking about the same, to where everybody has the same background, we're on the same page, we always agree on things. Quite the contrary, actually. What we're talking about are people bringing skills and diversity to the group that didn't exist otherwise. So it's this uniqueness, and that's where the power comes from. That's how these wonderful arguments can be born to create an environment for the best idea to win. Now, you might remember Catherine, who is our new CEO at Decision Tech in our book, as we discussed. And she understands this to a great deal, right? I mean, she was very different from the type of people in the organization that she came into. She was much older than everybody else, so there's a history that she brings that's unique and different. Completely different professional background, so she's walking into this highly developed tech firm, and she comes from an automotive industry, so a lot of different skills and experiences with that. But it's the strength in that diversity that provides an opportunities for these wonderful arguments to occur, to build an environment to where you can vet out that best idea, and it wins. The hierarchy loses and the best idea wins. So she very much understands that. To so much so, there's a couple really, I think, fantastic quotes that she makes in the book that you might recall. And so let's set the scene here for just a second. So she's meeting with her executive team for one of the first times, talking about herself, introducing herself, and she asked the question, who would rather go to a movie or attend a meeting? Go to a movie, hands down, everyone, universally. And she says, well, hang on a second, why is that the case? Because our meetings, we're tackling real world stuff. I mean, this is our lives here, the problems we're trying to solve, the decisions we're trying to make. That's not happening in a movie. So at a minimum, shouldn't our meetings be at least as interesting as a movie? And then she goes on in this comparison to say, what makes movies interesting and great is this idea of conflict, right? This idea of wonderful arguments. And then she goes on to say, and this, sit down for a second, right, when you hear this, if there's nothing worth debating, we won't have a meeting. I mean, sign me up, right? I mean, how many meetings have you sat through thinking, oh my God, when's this thing going to end? This presentation excluded, of course, I'm sure. But that is so powerful. And it's powerful because she completely recognizes the need for that type of environment. This creative conflict, this positive conflict, which is just really, really fantastic. So we've talked about, all right, what is a team and kind of the constructs of the team. Let's talk about for a moment who's on that team. Now, this particular hierarchy view you're very familiar with. It's tried and true. It's the traditional concept of what a team is. And it's legitimate. This is a team that we're all a part of. But as Catherine explains to us in the book, yes, it's a team, but it's limiting by definition. And the reason being is because it's already vertically siloed. So this is a business unit or an operation team that's focused on whatever element of the business they're part of. So this is the marketing group, or this is our IT group, or this is our operations group. So there's teams here, but they're already limited by the lens in which they're looking at a problem. The lens is the marketing lens, the operational lens, etc. That's not our most important team, she teaches us. And do you remember the term that she uses, what the most important team is? She calls it your first team. And it's the cross-functional group of your peers in the organization. So you've already introducing this breadth of diversity that didn't exist previously in our siloed team. And that is so important. Now, even if you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm down here, at the staff level, it doesn't apply to me, but it does, because through the course of your day, your career, you're going to be asked to tackle a certain problem or process or project. And you're going to have to pull in other people to help in that regard. Well, who do you want to pull in? Only those that are in your particular department or operational team. They're bringing in already sort of a siloed, limited viewpoint, because that's the world in which they're operating in. But if you already can reach out from a cross-functional perspective, you're introducing some diversity that didn't exist there before. You're creating an opportunities for what Steve described as these wonderful arguments to occur, for the best ideas to win. And that's really what we're talking about now. And it's really so important, because just think about it for a second from a product delivery or service delivery perspective. It's not accomplished just by the marketing group, or just by the operations teams, or just by the IT group. It spans the breadth of the organization in order to deliver that service, deliver that product. So pull in those people when the opportunity arises, and you're already strengthening the team because of that. Now, before we get into sort of the pitfalls that we need to be sensitive to in regards to team, let's just pause for a second. And are there any questions in the group from what we've covered so far?
Yeah, so when you're in a meeting, and how do you kind of, I get that you want to have a meeting with something that you would need to debate, but what's a way to kind of bring in a healthy conflict where it might be a setting where you're not, it's needed, because you do want to have that kind of positive conflict where, you don't want to say, well, that's my supervisor, or that's the department head.
Right.
How do you kind of push that idea to the forefront?
Yeah, that's a great segue into what we're going to discuss here for sure. So some of the pitfalls to look out for, and what can we do to address those. That's really interesting, because I think there's a lot of people really hesitant, particularly from a conflict standpoint, to kind of engage in that type of dialogue. And I think it really can kind of stem from a couple different sources, one of which we'll talk about in quite a bit of detail here in just a few moments. And that is this idea of kind of, what is the purpose of the team? Mm-hmm. Is it to reach a consensus, or is it to establish buy-in? And there's a difference between the two that I think people confuse. So a lot of folks are considering, well, if I'm in a team, we have to have a consensus about what we're going to do. So this general level of agreement that we're all, on the same page with. And that's kind of intimidating, because, how long does it take to get to that, right? I mean, which is one of the reasons why your meetings can go on forever and not really accomplish anything. But what our author, via Catherine in her book, teaches us is it's really not consensus that we're going after. It's this idea of buy-in. And that can occur without everyone saying, you know what, I fully agree with what you're saying, I'm on board, let's do it. But this sense of buy-in is where you have these wonderful arguments, you kind of vet out these best ideas with the presentation of the opinions and the facts that support it, et cetera. You can say, you know what, I'm not sure I completely understand or 100% agree with what you're saying, but your points are valid, I can get behind it, I can commit to giving this thing a real shot, and let's see if we can make it happen. So it's that buy-in that you're reaching. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about sort of how we need to view ourselves and others in terms of how to get there. And another element, I think, really is just more, from a human nature perspective, and it's the idea that, we just don't want to be wrong. We give the appearance of having been wrong, this idea of failing and fear of failure. And when I think about that, I'm reminded of one of my all-time favorite quotes. It's from an American author, Lawrence Shames. And as he describes success and failure, he says, you know, a lot of people consider success and failure as opposites, but they're really not. They're companions, like the hero and the sidekick. And I think that's a powerful image, and that you can't have the success without the failure. So if you want to sort of exponentially grow, you know, disruptive progress within an organization is kind of a, you know, one of the corporate buzzwords right now of coming up with these new innovative ideas. You need to have the problem surface, vet it out as a team, let the best idea wins to solve it, and then you're exponentially, you know, farther along in the process than you were if you never experienced that problem to begin with. So I think it's a couple of those things, and we'll get into that as we continue the process.